"You can't let her touch the will," Maya whispered. Marcus Bennett froze mid-step, the polished oak floor creaking beneath his shoes. For a moment, he wasn't even sure he had heard her correctly. His hand was still wrapped around the handle of his leather briefcase, his mind already halfway through the board meeting he was about to attend. He turned slowly, his voice sharper than he intended. "What did you just say?" Maya stood there in her socks and oversized school sweatshirt, barely tall enough to reach the brass doorknob behind her. Her hair was still messy from sleep, her dark eyes wide but unflinching. "I saw her," she said. "Miss Sabrina. She opened your safe. She took pictures of the will." Marcus blinked, utterly thrown. "What are you talking about, Maya?" Her name came out more like a sigh than a question. He ran a hand through his graying hair, trying to force his irritation down. "You shouldn't say things like that." "But I saw her," Maya insisted. "She was in the study last night when I came down for cereal. Maya, stop." His voice rose before he could check it, sharp and final. Maya stepped back, startled. Marcus had never raised his voice at her like that before. The silence that followed was thick and cold. Maya's lower lip trembled just barely, but she didn't cry. "I'm not lying," she said, almost too softly to hear. Marcus clenched his jaw. "Sabrina has done nothing but care for this family. She's been there for both of us. She's helping me, helping you." "She doesn't like me," Maya cut in. "She's trying," Marcus snapped. "And maybe you should too." Maya just stared at him for a long, heart-wrenching moment. Then she murmured something under her breath. "What was that?" Marcus barked. Maya looked up, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I said, I'm trying, Dad." The word hit him like a punch to the chest. Dad. She had never called him that before. Not once in the 2 years since he married her mother. Not even after Clara's funeral, when the house became a mausoleum of echoes and unopened doors. She always called him Marcus, polite, distant, as if keeping her heart locked in a place he was not allowed to reach. And now, when he had just barked at her, when he had all but accused her of lying, she called him Dad. He stood frozen, watching the little girl slowly walk away, her small shoulders rising and falling with breaths she didn't want anyone to notice. Something cracked in him. That night, after Sabrina left for her usual evening sound bath class, Marcus found himself alone in the study. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the ticking of the old brass clock that had once belonged to Clara's father. He stood there for a long time, staring at the safe built discreetly into the wall behind the painting of the magnolia tree. He hated himself for what he was about to do. He opened the safe. The will was still there, sealed in the manila envelope with the notary tag intact. Nothing looked disturbed, but the envelope felt wrong, thicker than he remembered. The paper inside was glossier. He couldn't say exactly what had changed, but something had. He sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk, rubbing his temples. Clara's voice returned to him in a whisper from memory. "Signatures and papers are sacred things, Marcus. Promise me, if anything ever happens to me, don't let your grief blind you." He had promised, and maybe he had already broken it. When Sabrina returned later, glowing from her spa session, she kissed his cheek as if nothing in the world could go wrong. He smiled. But something was off now, and for the first time he watched her not as a partner, but as a puzzle. He noticed how she made a beeline to the study, how she closed the door behind her, how she had suddenly taken an interest in his estate, how she had begun asking specific questions about the trust he had been planning to set up for Maya. He poured himself a drink and sat by the fireplace staring into the flames, haunted not by Clara's absence but by a single word: Dad. A word Maya had never used before. Not until she had something to lose, not until she decided to trust him, and maybe, just maybe, the person he should have been questioning all along wasn't the little girl who had everything to lose. It was the woman who had entered their lives smiling and had suddenly inserted herself into every room, every drawer, every whisper. The next morning, Marcus sat alone in the sunroom, his black coffee untouched and cold beside him. The Georgia sky outside was soft with spring haze. Birds danced from branch to branch, oblivious to the unrest behind glass. He hadn't slept. Maya's words echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Don't let her touch the will. And then, almost worse than that, Dad. A fragile bridge stretched across grief and suspicion. And somehow, despite everything, Marcus wanted to meet her halfway. "Mornin'," Sabrina chirped, gliding into the room barefoot, hair wrapped in a silk scarf, robe tied to perfection. She leaned down and kissed his cheek. "You didn't come to bed last night." "I had some things to think about." "Oh?" she asked, sliding gracefully into the chair across from him. She poured herself tea from the floral pot she'd set earlier, stirring it with fingers that moved like choreography. "Work stuff or Maya stuff?" Marcus forced a smile. "Both." Sabrina gave a sympathetic little hum. "She's still having those dreams, huh?" Marcus didn't answer. He watched her over the rim of his mug. How she tilted her head just so. How she didn't ask what Maya had said. She assumed, or rather hoped, he'd dismissed it. And until recently, he would have. "Actually," he said, keeping his tone neutral, "she said something strange last night." "Oh?" "She said she saw you in the study." Sabrina blinked just once. "When?" "Around midnight." A beat passed, just long enough. "Then she must have been dreaming again. You know how vivid kids' imaginations are, especially after, well, everything." "Maybe," Marcus said slowly, "but she was awfully specific." Sabrina's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus, you're not seriously suggesting I snuck into your study in the middle of the night to, what, read your documents?" "You've been asking a lot of questions lately," he said quietly. She laughed just a bit too quickly. "I live here. I care about our life. I'm not going to apologize for wanting to understand how things work." "Fair," Marcus said, nodding. Sabrina leaned forward, her voice softer now, dripping with warmth. "Look, I know Maya's still adjusting, and I know she misses Clara. Of course she does. But I've only ever wanted to be a good influence. I've been nothing but supportive." He met her gaze and smiled. "That's why I trust you." She visibly relaxed, her shoulders softening as she leaned back with a breath that sounded almost relieved. He excused himself a moment later, but inside, the knot in his chest only tightened. Her answers were polished, too polished. Her tone was always perfect, just enough emotion, just enough charm. But now, it felt rehearsed, like a performance she'd practiced before. He walked back to the study and closed the door. The safe sat there under the cabinet, quiet, solid, familiar. He opened it again, pulled out the will, and stared at it. He knew every word, every clause, every comma. But something was wrong. He opened the bottom drawer of Clara's old filing cabinet and pulled out the earlier draft, the one they had marked up together on a rainy night when Maya was still small enough to sit in Clara's lap and listen to bedtime stories about truth and legacy. The final paragraph didn't match. The wording in the safe version was similar but not identical. The new clause? It split control of the estate between Maya and a future spouse. Marcus's stomach dropped. Clara would never have written that, especially not after their long talks about making sure Maya was protected no matter what. He held both versions side by side. Fonts, spacing, letter weight, they were nearly identical, professional. But now that he was looking, the difference was clear. The forgery was subtle, but it was a forgery. Maya hadn't been dreaming. She'd been warning. That evening, Marcus canceled his meetings. He called the school and asked to pick Maya up himself. She was surprised when she climbed into the car. "Where's Mr. Harold?" "He's off today. Thought I'd take you instead." She said nothing, just buckled her seatbelt and stared out the window. "You hungry?" he asked. She shrugged. "Tacos?" She glanced at him. "Just us?" "Just us," he said. They sat in a corner booth at a quiet diner off Main. She sipped lemonade and watched the cook flip tortillas behind the glass. He didn't rush her, didn't press. Finally, he said gently, "I owe you an apology." Maya looked up, cautious. "I didn't believe you last night, and I should have." Her eyes didn't move. "I looked at the will," he said. "I compared it to the original. Someone changed it." Maya said nothing. "You were right," he added. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes shimmered. She looked away quickly, not wanting him to see. But Marcus saw anyway. "You were really brave to tell me." She nodded. "I didn't want to, but I promised Mom." Marcus froze. "You promised her?" "Before she died," Maya said. "She told me to watch the safe. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure no one ever touched your will. She said grief makes people blind." Marcus felt the breath leave his lungs. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn spiral notebook, Clara's journal. "She wrote about it," Maya said. "It's in here. See?" He took the notebook gently. There it was. Clara's handwriting, dated just weeks before the accident. "If something happens to me and someone new walks in too quickly, too easily, check the documents. Maya will know. She sees what we miss." That night, Marcus stood in the hallway with the altered will in one hand and Clara's journal in the other. Sabrina passed him, laughing into her phone, her voice light, her footsteps unconcerned. But he wasn't grieving now. He was watching, listening, remembering. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure who in this house was still wearing a mask. 3 days passed and Marcus said nothing. He watched. He noted how Sabrina lingered longer near his office door when he wasn't inside. How she casually asked if he needed help organizing his documents. How she once again brought up the estate and how complicated trusts could be. But most of all, he noticed the way she began referring to Maya with more pity than patience. "She's still troubled," Sabrina said one evening as she stirred honey into her tea. "Children act out when they feel threatened by someone new." Marcus smiled politely, nodded, but inside he was taking notes. By the 4th morning, he made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in a while, Lewis Carter, Clara's former attorney and old friend. Lewis had known Clara since law school. He arrived that afternoon, stepping out of his old Navy Lincoln in a coat too thick for spring and carrying a worn leather briefcase. Maya met him on the porch. "Uncle Lewis," she said softly. His smile was instant, warm, real. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said, and he meant it. Inside, they laid the 2 wills side by side. Lewis, wearing thick glasses, squinted over every page with meticulous care. "This paragraph," he said, tapping gently. "It's off. Same font, but the spacing wrong. Look at the kerning. Too tight. And the margins, they're off by 1/10 of an inch. Subtle, but it's there." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "So it's forged?" "Professionally," Lewis replied. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing, but not perfectly. And now we have the original to compare. If this forged version is filed, Sabrina could contest almost everything, including Maya's full inheritance." Silence fell between them. Maya sat quietly near the window, curled up with Clara's journal. Lewis reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small black device. "This is a high-sensitivity voice recorder. Admissible. My firm uses them for sensitive witness interviews. Maya can wear it. All we need is one conversation, one slip, one threat, anything remotely coercive. That's our proof." Marcus tensed. "I don't want her in danger." "She won't be," Lewis said. "You and I will be no more than a room away. The moment anything feels wrong, we step in." From across the room, Maya spoke quietly. "I can do it. If Mom were here, she'd want me to." Marcus's throat tightened. He looked at her. So small, so serious. She didn't look like a child preparing to trap a criminal. She looked like a daughter holding her mother's promise in both hands. He nodded once, unable to speak. That night, Sabrina was warmer than ever. At dinner, she served Marcus his wine and complimented Maya's new, calm demeanor. "I think we've turned a corner," she said, brushing Maya's hair back with a perfectly measured smile. Maya said nothing. The next day, Marcus told Sabrina he was updating the will. "Just to be responsible," he said with a shrug. "You and Maya deserve clarity if anything happens to me." Her eyes sparkled, but her voice stayed even. "Marcus, that's so thoughtful. Of course I'd never expect anything, but planning is wise." He handed her a draft later that night, a decoy Lewis had prepared, filled with inconsistencies, fake offshore holdings, and exaggerated business valuations. Any real partner would have asked questions. Sabrina didn't. She smiled wider. "Cayman Holdings," she murmured. "I thought those were liquidated years ago, but I guess I misunderstood." Marcus's pulse quickened. They had never discussed those accounts, not with her, not in this house. Lewis, seated silently in the adjacent room, tapped a quiet signal on his tablet. The recording was live, crisp, every word preserved. Sabrina kept reading aloud, almost to herself. "Zurich accounts. Clever. Splitting them off makes sense. Keeps Maya's portion tax shielded." Marcus stepped closer. "You seem very informed." She chuckled, still not looking up. "You forget. I listen when you talk, darling. You're always discussing finances." "That's funny," Marcus said, voice even. "I haven't mentioned those accounts in nearly 5 years, not even on the phone." She blinked, just once, then smiled again, colder. "Well, perhaps I just assumed." But the crack had already formed. Across the room, Maya sat on the love seat, wearing her butterfly hair clip, the one holding the tiny microphone. "Miss Sabrina," she said, voice calm, almost shy. "Would you want me to sign something if Daddy got hurt?" Sabrina turned slowly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you told me the other day we needed to talk about Mommy's jewelry. You said you had ideas." Sabrina's face twitched. Then she smiled. "It's good to plan ahead, sweetheart. Maybe a small gift agreement. Something to show you're grateful." "Even if I didn't want to?" Maya asked softly. Sabrina tilted her head. Sometimes kids don't know what's best. Lewis tapped the tablet again. Marcus stepped forward. That's enough. Sabrina turned sharply. Marcus, we heard everything. Lewis entered the room, recorder in hand. Impressive work, Miss Lorne. Or should I say, Miss Vanessa Ramirez? Sabrina's eyes darted. You little brat, she hissed, turning to Maya. You have no idea what you've just done. Maya looked back at her calmly. I saved what my mom promised to protect. Red and blue lights flared through the windows. A patrol car and 2 unmarked SUVs rolled up the driveway. When the front door opened, Sabrina froze. Miss Sabrina Lorne, the lead officer said, we have a warrant for your arrest. You're making a mistake, she spat, her voice unraveling. I'm a guest in this home. No, Marcus said, stepping forward. You're a predator, and you picked the wrong house. She spun around, looked for an escape, but the officers closed in. Don't resist, one said. Come quietly. Marcus, please, she begged. You know me. I've loved you. I cared for your daughter. Don't let them do this. He didn't flinch. Take her away. As the handcuffs snapped around her wrists, Maya stood at the top of the stairs, Claire's journal clutched to her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She watched, and Marcus saw it then. His daughter wasn't just a little girl anymore. She was something else now, something strong. The house fell quiet once more, but the quiet had changed. No longer a silence born of fear. It was the calm after a storm, the sound of truth finally being heard. That night, as he tucked Maya into bed, she clutched Claire's journal like a shield. You were so brave, he whispered. She didn't reply, she just leaned into him. When she finally spoke, it was almost too quiet to hear. She tried to make me sign something a few days ago. Said it was a thank you gift, but it said future property transfer agreement. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. And you didn't sign it? No, she said. I remembered what Mommy said. Never sign something just to make someone happy, especially if it doesn't feel right. He kissed the top of her head. You listened better than I ever did, she whispered. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. He pulled her closer. I'm sorry it took me so long, but I believe you now, and I always will. As he closed her door and turned off the light, he knew something deep in his bones. The line had been drawn, the lies had been caught, and the promise Clara made him keep had just been passed to the next generation, not in whispers or paperwork, but in one small girl's courage. The courtroom was colder than Marcus expected. Even with the morning sun pouring through the tall windows, everything inside felt hushed and weighty, like justice itself was holding its breath. Maya sat beside him on the wooden bench, her feet not quite touching the floor, her small hands wrapped tightly around Clara's journal like it was armor. She wore her navy cardigan and white dress, and a tiny silver necklace Clara had once given her. It shimmered softly against her skin, just visible beneath the collar. Marcus looked at her, marveling again at the stillness in her face, the strength she seemed to carry, now not because she had to, but because she chose to. They were not here as victims today. They were here as witnesses. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with deep lines of experience etched across her face, and the court rose as one. When the hearing began, it moved quickly through the facts, the forged will, the audio recordings, the history of Sabrina's aliases in multiple states. But then came the moment no one had truly prepared for, when the clerk stood and read Maya's letter aloud. It was short, handwritten, with a few crooked lines and one smudged word, but it carried more power than any legal brief in the room. My name is Maya William, and I'm 8 years old. I used to think adults always knew when someone was lying, but now I know sometimes kids see things first. Miss Sabrina said she was helping us, but really she was trying to take my mom's promises away. She scared me and tried to make me sign a paper I didn't understand. But I remembered what Mommy told me. Never sign something just to make someone happy, especially if it doesn't feel right. Now I want to help other kids like me, because no one should be scared in their own house, and no one should lose what someone they loved left behind. When the judge finished reading, the courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney sat still, pen frozen above his notepad. The judge looked over her glasses at Maya and spoke softly but clearly. "Miss William, this court thanks you for your courage, your clarity, and your commitment to justice. What you've shared today will protect others. Your words matter." Outside, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, but Marcus kept one protective hand on Maya's shoulder and guided her gently to the waiting car. She said little on the ride home, her face pressed to the window as the city passed in a blur. That evening, she sat curled on the couch in her pajamas, the journal open on her lap, flipping pages without really reading. Marcus handed her a mug of cocoa and sat beside her. "Daddy," she said after a long pause, testing the word again like it still surprised her. "I want to be like Mommy. I want to help people who are being tricked, people who don't know it yet." He looked at her, heart aching with pride and sorrow all at once. "You already are, Maya." And somewhere between the quiet hum of the fireplace and the rustling of spring wind outside, Marcus knew they hadn't just survived something. They had found something deeper, a purpose. Within the week, the study had been cleared out, repainted in soft earth tones, and turned into what Maya called her library. Clara's law books lined the shelves alongside new volumes Marcus had ordered. Legal basics for kids, stories about justice and truth, and journals filled with blank pages waiting to be written. In the center stood a small wooden desk, Clara's old one from her first office, resized and polished to fit Maya perfectly. Maya spent hours there, reading, writing, thinking. Not for school, not because someone told her to, but because she wanted to understand. She wanted to be ready. One afternoon, she looked up from a book on children's rights and asked without warning, "Why do some people smile when they're planning something bad?" Marcus paused in the doorway. "Because they think they have already won," he said. She nodded, looking back down. "Sabrina smiled a lot." "She did," he said, but Maya smiled too. And hers was real. The following Friday, Marcus received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short typed note and copies of 3 wills from 3 different states. All had nearly identical, suspicious clauses inserted using the same font and spacing discrepancies. The note read, "She's done this before. You're not alone. Thank your daughter for stopping her." Marcus handed the documents to Lewis, who passed them immediately to authorities. That night, Maya sat by the fireplace reading aloud from Clara's journal to a small group of children, 5 in total, all gathered on the floor of her new library. They were children from nearby neighborhoods, referred by teachers and friends. Some had experienced things they couldn't explain. Some just wanted to feel safe. They listened to Maya read, then raised their hands, shy at first, then more confidently, asking what to do if someone told them to keep a secret, or if they didn't understand a form someone asked them to sign. Maya answered carefully, pulling out a laminated checklist she had made with Marcus. If they say hurry, you say slow down. If they say it's fine, ask for help. If it doesn't feel right, don't sign. Marcus watched from the doorway, arms crossed, the heat of the fire warm in his face and his chest full with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That night, Maya whispered as he tucked her in, "Daddy, if I grow up and forget how this feels, will you remind me?" He nodded, his voice thick. "I promise." And they both knew he would. 3 years had passed since Maya sat in that glass conference room and reminded a room full of lawyers what conscience sounded like. Yet the memory of it still stayed with Marcus like the scent of Claire's lavender in the spring quiet, lasting, woven into the walls of their home. He still woke early some mornings to the sound of Maya laughing in the kitchen. Her voice, louder now, braver, and unmistakably sure. She was 11, taller than before, with wild curls she refused to tame, and a confidence that seemed to bloom with every passing month. Her voice no longer wavered when she spoke in public, not even on the day she stood before the Georgia State Legislature to testify in support of a bill that would later be called Maya's Law. The Loud Hearts Initiative had grown beyond anything Marcus could have predicted. What started as a simple idea born in the corner of their old study had turned into a statewide foundation, partnering with schools, training volunteer advocates, and providing resources to children in the foster system and low-income communities. Maya never called it her legacy. She said it was just her voice doing its job. The day of the final incorporation hearing, the courtroom was packed. Teachers, students, reporters, and public officials all crammed into wooden benches and lined the back walls. Maya sat in the front row, wearing a navy blazer and clutching a slightly worn folder. Her feet no longer dangled from the chair. Marcus sat beside her, trying to memorize every second. When the judge asked if she wanted to make a statement, Maya stood without hesitation, walked to the center of the room, and opened her folder. 3 years ago, she began, I was just 8, and I was scared. I told the truth, but no one believed me at first. Not because they were bad people, but because I was small and quiet and black. I've learned since then that truth doesn't always speak loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides in a child's eyes or in a shaken hand. But it's still truth. She paused, looking at the crowd. This foundation isn't about me. It's about the next Maya. It's about making sure the smallest voices are heard without needing a miracle. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, but Maya didn't bask in it. She walked back to her seat, sat down, and took Marcus's hand. I still get nervous, she whispered. That's how I know you're still human, he said, squeezing her fingers gently. That evening, as the house buzzed with celebration, Maya disappeared from the crowd. Marcus found her out back on the swing, staring at the stars. He brought her a slice of cake and sat in the grass beside her. You okay? He asked. I'm good, she said, kicking lightly. But I kept thinking about something. What if I had stayed quiet? What if I had let her touch the will? What if you hadn't believed me? He looked up at the sky and then at her. But you didn't stay quiet, and I did believe you, and look where we are. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you think other kids will listen now? I think they already are. In the weeks that followed, letters continued pouring in from across the country, from children in shelters, from teenagers who had signed things they didn't understand and were now trying to fight back, from a young girl in Idaho who said Maya's speech made her tell the truth about someone hurting her. Then, one morning, a small package arrived in the mail. No note, just a faded stuffed bunny, slightly torn at the ear, Maya gasped when she opened it. "That's mine," she whispered. "I lost it when I was 6. Marcus turned the box over. A return address in Seattle. Sender name, Sabrina Holloway. They didn't speak of it. Maya held the bunny gently, then placed it on her bookshelf beside her journal. "Not all stories end badly," she said quietly. "Some just take longer to find their way home." The first statewide Loud Hearts gathering took place that summer under a white canopy tent in Atlanta. Over 100 families attended. Children wore matching T-shirts with Maya's hand-drawn logo, a heart with wings, and on the back were the words, "Brave words, loud hearts." Maya stood under the tent, microphone in hand, looking out over the sea of faces. "My mom used to say the quiet ones are the strongest, but I think the brave ones are the ones who speak even when their voice shakes. I didn't save my dad. We saved each other. And now we're helping others save themselves." The applause echoed like thunder, but what stayed with Marcus most was what happened after. A small girl, no more than 7, came up and handed Maya a folded piece of paper. It had crayon drawings and a note. "Thank you for teaching me I can say no." Maya crouched down and hugged her without a word. That night, on the porch, Marcus asked if she was tired. "A little," she said, "but mostly full." He nodded. "Me too." She looked at him, thoughtful. "Promise me, if I grow up and forget what it feels like to be small, you'll remind me." "I will," he said, "but something tells me you won't forget." As the stars blinked above them and the air cooled with the coming dusk, Marcus watched his daughter not just grow, but lead. Not just speak, but echo. Not just survive, but shape. The will had never been about wealth. Not really. It was about intention, about legacy, about the quiet strength passed from a mother's journal to a daughter's whisper and a father's belief. A voice had rewritten what silence had once buried, and in that voice a world had changed.